What's going on, everyone? So with my latest video, this is part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. Done such directors in the past, such as Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, Spike Lee, Spike Jonze, and many more. You guys can check out those directors and those many more in my director ranking playlist down below. But guys, you clicked on this video, so you know this time around I'm focusing on Francis Ford Coppola's films and ranking them from worst to best. Now, if you're new to the channel, do keep in mind this will not include any short films, documentaries, TV shows, or in the case of Francis Ford Coppola, pornographic films. None of those. Just specifically speaking, feature-length films that Francis Ford Coppola has done. And I'm filming this video on September 28th of 2024, so do keep in mind that as of the filming of this video, he has done 23 films, so I'll be ranking them from 23 being his worst to number 1 being his best, and of course, my humble opinion. And it goes without saying that this list is going to be subjective, meaning yours is going to be different than mine, and that's what's great about film as an art form, and I truly do look forward to seeing your list down below for this director. But guys, enough exposition. Let's get started. So kicking things off, number 23, we have Finian's Rainbow. This was a swing for the fences and a miss. This was a musical that was a slodge to get through, and I really didn't like it. And I would only recommend watching this if you're like myself and trying to watch all of Francis Ford Coppola's movies. Besides that, avoid this movie. So that was my number 23. Next up, my number 22 is a movie I like slightly more. That's mostly because it was a little bit shorter, and that is Jack with Robin Williams. Juvenile, delinquent, and just overall a mess of a movie, and just one that you would not think Francis Ford Coppola directed. But here we are. Jack's my number 22. Next up, my number 21, we have The Rain People. This is a movie that's rather hard to find. I did manage to find it in, certain avenues. And I have to say, after watching it, I can see why Coppola kind of buried this movie. It's pretty disappointing. It doesn't really have a lot of the, stylistic choices that you would see in later movies that Coppola would direct. But it's not his worst, of course, but it is a disappointing movie, and that is why it is my number 21. Next up, my number 20, I've seen some people have this lower on their list, and I can definitely understand why, but my number 20 is Twixt. So Twixt is a movie that stars Ella Fanning, and this is one that I saw, not the theatrical cut, it's called the Betwixt Now and Sunrise, the authentic cut, and it is actually shorter than the theatrical cut. I think it's only 80 minutes long, and even at 80 minutes long, it was a slodge to get through. Ella Fanning was good, though, and that's one of the reasons why I liked it a little bit more than these other movies, but overall, just like these other entries, I would pretty much avoid unless you're trying to watch all Francis Ford Coppola's movies. And that's my number 20. Next up, my number 19. I feel like this was a movie that Francis Ford Coppola made, and it was kind of an in-between from his pornographic days into his, films that, he can show to a wide audience, and that is You're a Big Boy Now. So You're a Big Boy Now feels a lot like a prelude to what we would see a couple of years later with The Graduate. And on that front, you can definitely say that this movie walked so that way The Graduate could run. So I have to give some props to this movie, and that's why I have it a little bit higher up. But besides that, wasn't a big fan of this movie. The acting is okay, I suppose, and some of the filmmaking is okay, and you can see that, that he would go on to do better stuff, but it's just a very kind of movie, and that's why I have it as my number 19. Next up, my number 18, I said at the beginning of Finian's Rainbow how that movie was a swing and a miss. We have another swing and a miss, and that is Megalopolis. This was his newest movie, and I really admire the ambition. I really do. And there are some scenes, like spurts here and there, that I did enjoy, for sure. But at the same time, this is a big mega mess, if you will. Just not a movie that I loved, but at the same time, if you have this higher up on your list, I can definitely respect that. I could see this movie actually having a cult classic status in years to come, but only time will tell. And as of filming this video, though, I'm not really part of that cult. I just think it was kind of a movie that I admired on some fronts, but a lot of fronts I was very frustrated by. And that's why, despite respecting it to an extent, it's still quite low on this list. And that's why I have it as my number 18. Next up, my number 17, this is Peggy Sue Got Married. The title says it all. This movie is, it is what it is. I didn't love it. In fact, I was kind of bored watching this, but the reason why I have it a little bit higher up than all these other entries is because watching this movie, you can definitely tell that the story was something that Coppola was interested in. It's all about family, which is a theme that, permeates most of his filmography. So I can definitely see that he was interested in the material. But unfortunately, the directing just really never came to life. And just overall, the material itself didn't. So I thought it was a mixed bag of a movie. And that's why I have it as my number 17. Next up, my number 16, we have Youth Without Youth. This was made in I think it was the late 2000s, early 2010s. It stars Tim Roth. And this is one of those experimental art house films that Coppola did during that time period, similar to like Twixt. And I liked it much better than Twixt. And I do think that there are some elements to this that I really appreciated, such as Tim Roth's performance, some of the visual storytelling I also liked, but it is kind of a mess too. Like, I didn't really get anything of it. Like, I saw this a couple months ago, and I have a tough time recollecting a lot of it, just certain things here and there. And I guess it's kind of fitting given, the material though, because it is about, someone that's old. But regardless, I can see why some people might have this higher up on the list. But for me, I think it's kind of forgettable, but I did like it slightly more than these other entries. And that's why I have it as my number 16. Next up, my number 15, we have Gardens of Stone. Yeah, it's a mixed bag of a movie. I think that the performances are fine. I do think that it's interesting with what he's going for, but I just left the movie saying, it is what it is. And that's why it is my number 15. Next up, my number 14, we have Dementia 13. Really likes the black and white cinematography. The performances are fine for what they're going for, and I do think the premise is also interesting. And those are the things that I think were the standouts. But overall, it's still an early one of his movies where it's like you can see that there are some elements of like his potential, but it's not fully realized just yet. But I still enjoyed it to an extent, and that's why I have it as my number 14. Next up, my number 13, we have Tetro. Yeah, I really like the black and white cinematography for this. Alan Arkwright is also in this, and I think this was one of his first movies. He's quite good in it. Just an overall very well acted film. It's a very well shot film, and the theme of family in this movie, I think, is much more fully realized in these other entries that I mentioned. And it's one of those movies that he made around the same time as Youth Without Youth, but I like it much more than Youth Without Youth, and that's why it has my number 13. Next up, my number 12, we have The Godfather, Part 3. So The Godfather Part 3, as a caveat, I watched the theatrical cut because that's the one that got a Best Picture nomination. I did hear that the Coda cut is one that, enhances the movie, but I just don't really have any interest in watching it after watching the theatrical cut because the theatrical cut just doesn't really justify the existence of this being a trilogy. I do think that this is a series that should have just been 2 parts, especially with the way that Part 2 ended. It was perfection. But at the same time, I can see to an extent why some people would love this movie because the filmmaking is top tier. Of course, Coppola is at the height of his career pretty much when this movie came out, and his directing is fine. I just think that the overall story was something that was kind of explored in Part 2 already. So it's just kind of like But again, if you love this movie, I can totally respect that. But for me, feel quite mixed about it. That's why I have it as my number 12. Next up, my number 11 is The Rainmaker. This is a fine courtroom movie. It is perfunctory. It does what it needs to set out to do, but at the same time, it's rather forgettable. But I do like it a little bit more than Godfather Part 3, and that's why I have it as my number 11. Next up, my number 10, we have The Outsiders. So The Outsiders has 2 cuts, the theatrical cut and the complete novel. And recently, I finally saw the complete novel cut, and I want to say this. Please avoid at all costs. And the reason why I say that is because the score is just so distracting, and it really undermines any emotional beats that goes on in the movie versus the theatrical cut. The score actually fits the emotions that are intended. I will say that there are some elements that the complete novel add that I liked, but overall that score is just so distracting that it made a movie that I grew up with and really appreciated to a movie now that I'm just like, it's okay, it's fine. But it is a movie that I do think should be watched, but again, the theatrical cut, and that's why I have it as my number 10. Next up, my number 9, we have One from the Heart. I saw the reprise cut, and I have to say, I can see why this movie bombed when it came out. I can see why critics thought it was a mixed bag of a movie when it came out during its day. But watching it now, I admire the behind the scenes of what Coppola was going for. I also admire how he was trying to change the industry, and in an alternate reality, it would have been fascinating to see if this movie did really well and see if we had a lot of movies that were going to be similar to this. Because it is a movie that, it's not for everyone. Like, it is a very odd movie, but because it was so odd, I just admired many aspects of it, specifically the filmmaking and all the techniques that Coppola used. And it's a gorgeous looking film. So I definitely would recommend watching this movie, but at the same time, I can see if you watch this movie and you don't like it and hate it to an extent. I get that, but I can also see if you absolutely love it. For me, I thought it was okay, but I have a lot of admiration for this movie, and that's why I have it a little bit higher up on this list at my number 9. Next up, my number 8, we have The Cotton Club. I saw the Encore edition, which it does add, I think it's like 10, 15 minutes, something like that. But I liked this movie. I thought it was very interesting, and it's definitely one of those movies that, again, it came out during the peak of Coppola's career, where you can definitely see that he was firing on all cylinders. He knew what he wanted to create. I didn't love it, but I definitely respected it, especially the filmmaking and Coppola's directing. But yeah, I would definitely recommend watching The Cotton Club. It doesn't really get talked about that much, to be honest, which is a shame. But yeah, I have that as my number 8. Next up, my number 7, we have Tucker, The Man in His Dream. So this is a movie that 100% is Coppola. It's all about family. It's all about someone that is trying to change an industry. In this case, it's the car industry. In the case of One from the Heart, Coppola was trying to change the film industry. So it's definitely a movie that 100% feels like Coppola. And I really admire this movie. And it's got some really interesting filmmaking techniques that I appreciated. And I found it to be a very entertaining film. Like, it is rock solid. I would definitely recommend this film. It's one of those films that Coppola directed that you wouldn't think he directed at first, but after watching his filmography and seeing a lot of his themes, it's like, yes, that's 100% Coppola. It makes sense. But yeah, I like this movie quite a bit, and that's why I have it as my number 7. Next up, my number 6. This is a movie that I've been putting off for probably a decade plus, and after finally seeing it, you see how high up it is on the list, so you can tell that I really liked it, and that is my number 6, Rumblefish. I really dug this film. I loved the black and white cinematography and how it is very symbolic for a certain character that's in the movie. Not going to spoil anything, but I also loved how there's certain colors that permeate the movie that reminded me a lot of like Schindler's List, but it did come out before Schindler's List. So in some ways, Schindler's List was inspired by this movie, but it's just a very gritty movie. It's a very gritty movie. It's very well shot, and it features a really good lead performance of Matt Dillon. Just a very, very well acted film. It's very well put together, and just one of those films that Coppola directed that just unfortunately doesn't get talked about that much. But I do hope that on some people's list that this is higher up on their list, because I think it's quite good, and that's why it was my number 6. Next up, we get into the nitty-gritty top 5. My number 5, we have Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yes, I really like this film. This is utilizing a lot of like 1920s, 1930s filmmaking techniques, and to great effect. Costume design, makeup, production design, cinematography, score. Amazing. It's just every aspect of filmmaking is perfection. Every performance is great. Except Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves, I really like him as an actor and a stuntman, but his performance does leave a lot to be desired. But still, I quite like this film a lot. I think that it is one of Coppola's best. Like, it is, without a doubt, such a well-crafted film. And highly recommend picking this up in 4K. But that was my number 5. Next up, my number 4. This is one that I haven't picked up yet because I'm waiting for it to come out in 4K in the United States. My number 4 is The Conversation. Talk about a paranoid thriller that works so well. I loved The Conversation. I saw it like 11 years ago, and 11 years ago I thought it was good, but I didn't love it. But I rewatched it twice already this year, and each time I find myself loving this film more and more. It is a slow burn for sure, but with what it leads up to, it is truly phenomenal. Just a great, great film that is one of the best of the 70s, and just one of my favorite films of all time. And yeah, Conversation, my number 4. Next up, my number 3, we have another one of my favorite films of all time. We have Apocalypse Now. So there's 3 cuts. I prefer the theatrical cut personally, but I know that it's subjective. I've seen some people love the final cut, which is fine. I've seen also some people love the Redux cut, but for me, my personal cut is the theatrical cut. What a great film. What a phenomenal war film. One of the best art house war films of all time, and just a true classic of the genre. It's a film that came out, 46 years ago? Or, 45, but it would be 46 when you guys are watching it. But this is just a film that it came out so long ago, but it looks so, so good, and it's because it's shot on film, and there's just so much love and care that's put into this film. The Heart of Darkness documentary is a really good companion piece that does come along with the 4K set, and I would recommend watching it because it gives a lot of insight to the behind the scenes. But a masterpiece. Love Apocalypse Now. Next up, it's the nitty-gritty top 2, and these are the ones that a lot of people duke it out in regards to which they prefer, but I'm just going to put these both up here. My number 2 is The Godfather Part 2. It is one of, if not the best prequels of all time, that also works as a sequel. It is 3 hours and 20 minutes. It's a film that gets better with each viewing, and I think it just is a must-see. If you love cinema, it is a must-see. Please, watch Godfather Part 2. And of course, my number 1, it's been my number 1 since I first saw Coppola's filmography. My number one is The Godfather. Yeah, it's a masterpiece. It set the standards for the gangster genre, in my personal opinion, and it did a lot for filmmaking. It's just a masterpiece. I'm glad that I finally got to see this in theaters. Like, seeing this in a Dolby theater a couple years ago was incredible, and just a film that shines on 4K. And that's the thing. All three of these, they do shine on 4K. I forgot to mention that, but yeah, Godfather Part 1. It's my number one. But yeah, guys, I try to talk a little bit about the director at the end, if I like him or not. And I have to say, overall, Coppola has some bad movies. He has some ugly movies, but he also has some good movies and some masterpieces. He is definitely a director that has a variety of, hits or misses. But overall, he's done a lot for the industry. And I really commend him, especially for his top five. His top five that I personally think are his best work are the ones that I think did the most for the film industry. And not only that, they're the ones that I find the most entertaining, the most interesting, and just the ones that really changed me as a film critic. So I love Francis Ford Coppola. Even if he does have plenty of misses, I still quite like him. And yeah, I think he's a director that I love the fact that he's given us so many people. I mean, without him, we wouldn't have Nicolas Cage. We wouldn't have Jason Schwartzman. We certainly wouldn't have Sofia Coppola. So there's so many people that he brought into the limelight that I am so glad. And just him as an individual, I greatly admire him. I think that he is someone that, I'm going to miss him. I'm hoping that he does a film sometime, but odds are Megalopolis was his last film. So that's why I finally decided to rank his work. But guys, what's your ranking for Francis Ford Coppola's filmography? Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, if you haven't done so already, don't forget the subscription, notification bell, follow me now on Letterboxd, Patreon, and I will get you guys later.